Gunjan is a quintessential entrepreneur, right? He's best known for WhoWare that he sold to Lycos. And in social impact, he has founded and helped a number of social impact programs. You can see some of them there. A $40 million US-India endowment around science and technology. And then he's also been part of Child Health Services, a health ed program which has actually earned a special ed status from the UN. And he mentors two programs. One is Fuzia, actually his daughter, and I guess his spending time has also encouraged her to do something around women entrepreneurship, and Horasis, bringing global leaders together. So Gunjan, love to have you on the panel.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Joe.
The second panelist I'd love to introduce is Shwak. Shwak Shastravolu, please give him a big hand. Shwak has about 15 patents, and he's been an entrepreneur in this space. He founded the fintech companies Yodlee, and he's been very involved in social impact, having experience with both Asha and Pratham. In his for-profit work, he's tried to incorporate social initiatives as part of the goals of his organizations. But more importantly, right now he's on the board of two very, very interesting organizations so Branch, which provides access to people for fin services in South Africa, it's now growing global. And the other one is Brightside, which focuses on removing financial stress for many Americans, and it starts to get the employers involved in that whole story. Thank you, Shwak.
Thank you. And
the third, Abhay Bhushan, please give him a big hand, is going to join us and talk about high-impact social entrepreneurship. Abhay is himself a serial entrepreneur, and he's well known for Portola Communications, which was acquired by Netscape. And in social impact, he was the first founding president of Pan IIT. And then at Xerox, he was the first who got them started on the whole journey of environmental give back, a very social cause. Abhay then went and spent time in India himself. He kind of got himself committed to the sector. He spent a year looking at integrated development for rural India and spent a year working in programs there. And then based on his experience there, when he came back, he got involved with ICA, helping other social impact programs find the foothold that they needed to start to scale and do the right thing. And we've got a fantastic panel there. So let me give you a quick sense of why we're having this panel. And before we kind of get there, how many of you all are already involved in some kind of a social venture? Can we just have a show of hands? All right. And how many of you all are interested in getting involved in some kind of a social venture? Fantastic. I think you all are the audience. So part of what we want to show you is it's not that difficult. There are some tricks, there are some clues, and our panelists are going to show you three different things. How do you define entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship? Next, how do you get to getting to success around high impact? And third, is there some magic? Is there some big learning, something that you want to kind of build upon to get there? And what's more interesting is our panelists will not bring the same perspective as they come up with their answers. There are different ways to skin the cat. And so we're going to show you how you can think about entrepreneurship, impact, as well as how you can deliver that in different ways. So without much ado, let's start with you, Gunjan. How would you differentiate social entrepreneurship from just social welfare?
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. This is a topic which is very near and dear to me. So to me, social entrepreneurship is, it's a form of entrepreneurship in its truest form. But you're looking at really not just profit line, but you're looking at a double profit line of looking at social impact. And in fact, I go to say that you should be looking at the triple profit line, which is financial returns. You're looking at social impact, but you're also looking at an organization which is built on the foundations of diversity and truly embracing the society's fabric. But when you design an organization which is going to actually make the impact, that is a social entrepreneur, and there's no limit to what it can be. And a good example that I want to throw is Kaiser Permanente, as you know, is a $60 billion nonprofit company, $60 billion. So that's a valid example.
That's a huge number.
And there is 1 or 2 person shops, small organizations making an impact at a very small scale. So the boundaries of what is possible is limitless. So that's social entrepreneurship to me.
Okay, Shwak, would you like to add something to how one defines social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think to me, social entrepreneurship is somewhat similar. I actually think of it as entrepreneurship first and social second, so to speak, in that ultimately you need to kind of think about this as starting something just like you would start any other company or any other kind of initiative, except in this particular scenario, your end goal is actually to create some kind of social impact in addition to kind of creating other values. So it is, to me, a lot more about creating a sustainable company, for a lack of a better word, that has social impact products or services that are a consequence of that enterprise.
So a for-profit view that kind of then has sustainability and a consequence.
That is correct.
Abhay, what's your perspective on
Well, I just want to build upon what you said. But between business and social entrepreneurship, we have many of the same kind of common roots. I would also say the purpose of business is to help society. Why? Business exists to provide a product or service that's needed by society. Every business. Some are, of course, you can say they're not really doing good, they're doing harm, but it's the primary motivation of the person who comes, the entrepreneur. The primary motivation of the social entrepreneur is, how do I help society? How can I benefit community? The primary motivation I find of the business entrepreneur who comes is, how do I make more money? So when I mentored both social entrepreneurs and business, like Sandeep Pandey, Asha for Education, that you were part of there, Shwak, and some of you. He comes to me with Deepak Gupta and another person and says, we want to do something to benefit primary education in India. That was their motivation. I said, why do you want to do this thing? He's getting a PhD, both are getting PhDs at Berkeley. And they say, this is really what I want to do because I see the problem there. I want to solve and benefit this for all over India. So that's the motivation. And business entrepreneurs come to me, I say, why do you want to start this company? They say, I want to make a lot of money. Okay. I said, what will you do when you make a lot of money? He said, okay, then I'll retire. I said, what will you do to retire? Then I'll go to the beach. I've yet to see them go to the beach. There's a first company, second company. The question is the motivation. One is personal enrichment. Also, there's other motivations too. The other one is benefiting how community. So the motivation is one of the key things that distinguishes.
So that's just to build on what I heard, and I think it's all different ways of looking at the same thing. I heard double impact, in a sense, doing more with less, scarce resources. I've heard use a for-profit model, right? And then drive to sustainability and get social good. And I've heard it's the motivation around social impact that's the differentiator. At the same time, what's common, I'm hearing in all the three of the examples, it's that you get to some kind of a business model that's sustainable, right? Yep. Otherwise, you cannot deliver results, right? And I think we have three different, very successful social entrepreneurs bringing a slightly different flavor, but really talking about the same thing. Creating a business model around it, delivering impact, and having sustainability. But what defines impact? How can one decide whether you're having impact? Are you being successful in what you want to get done? And I think that's the other part that we want to talk about and dwell about. Shwak, can you tell us a little bit about how you would think about success? So you've gotten there, you're an entrepreneur, you've got your business model for profit. How do you decide that you're successful on having impact?
See, I think once you actually agree on the fact that you want to create impact, it starts to kind of become an easier thing to calibrate and run more like a business. A business, what do? You actually find out what your KPIs are. You're trying to decide what it exactly is going to drive the business to success. Mm-hmm. In the social impact scenario, your KPIs are actually more external, meaning that they're less about what you're doing inside the company. It's a little bit more about what's actually happening outside the company.
Okay.
And so you actually want to establish what the right KPI is. And that KPI, in my mind at least, needs to be more macro than micro. Meaning less about how many individuals you've impacted, because that I believe is more of a vanity metric. You can never scale, you can never sustain a system that basically impacts 10 or 15 people, which is why you see someone like Bill Gates not going out and donating some of their money to individuals to kind of help them out when they're in trouble, right? What they're really looking at is saying, okay, did we eradicate a certain kind of disease? And how much along the way of that eradication are we, right? That's the right KPI, the macro impact that you're in the area you're trying to impact. Whether it's education, which is something I'm very passionate about, I want to understand, like, are we what fraction of the population that we're trying to impact are you actually graduating from high school or from college or from any other kind of mechanism that you're trying to make sure.
So one of the ways you're saying is not just the individual, but at the overall community that you're trying, are you getting there? Are you making a big enough change for that? For that target audience.
And it could be small impacts. Like you don't have to worry about the fact that you didn't take education levels or high school graduation rates from 5% to 15%. You took it from 5% to 5.2%. That's fine, right? Because we're talking about
a huge group of people. Sure. Abhay, would you like to add something?
Yeah, like in business, entrepreneurs and business model, it's quite clear what it is. Okay, you measure revenue growth, you measure profits, there's some clear financial metrics there, how many employees you have, the employee growth, how many jobs you provided, you can measure those things. In the social areas, it's a little more subtle because you can say how you have benefited community. But that's kind of very vague and wide. So you have to really do, like what is education, you have health, you have vocational training, providing people jobs, creating enterprise within the thing, how good everything. So what I learned when I went to India, Integrated Rural Development Program, is that you really have to look at many of these things together. How happy are the people? Now, happiness is a very vague thing.
Okay.
You can say, how is the society benefited? Okay, so you can measure each of these things because one impact helps. So there's not just one measure. Now, if you're in healthcare, of course, you can measure health. Even education, if you're integrated, you have to measure many things into overall, because one thing impacts, you can improve the health, but you've got to do all of these things to make the society come.
So I have to play that back. You're saying in a rural context, there are so many different things. Yeah. Just changing one may not change where society gets to. Right. Measure impact across multiple integrated dimensions.
But depending upon what's social entrepreneurs, what area they're focusing on, they can measure that impact.
That impact, okay.
But overall, if you want to benefit society, you've got to see how's the environment, are there sanitation there. When I went to the village area, there was not a single water seal latrine. There was actually not even a latrine. You forget about water seal. People used to go in the woods. And by the time in 1 year finished, we had installed 200 latrines, is paid by the people, creating jobs for about a dozen people to make them, dig them, and install them, and make the outhouse with water seal. So that's the kind of thing where it involves entrepreneurship. It involves creating entrepreneurs within. And that's how a society helps. So business and social enterprise are very interlinked.
Okay. Gunjan, what would you add to impact? How would you think about it?
Yeah, no, so I think it's a great question, and I'm just building upon what I just heard the other panelists talk about. But let me just take an example from a couple of things that I have done maybe, so for example, one of the organizations, Child Family Health International, so the whole idea there was, we just said, okay, can we take American pre-medical students before they become doctors, and can we leverage that to raise their awareness about global health issues around the world, but also when they actually travel to these countries and they help in those local communities, it brings value to them. So we were thinking about not just what the impact is, but how to go about doing in a model that works. And the impact is now being felt across 11 countries, and there's many, many more countries to go to even now. But that's an example. The other example I would give is from US India Endowment Board, which we created with Talat Hassan and myself and a few other people who were involved, Anish Chopra, who was at the time in the Office of White House Science and Technology Policy. The idea was to put monies from the government of United States, the State Department, and from Science and Technology Department of India to pull together for commercialization of science and technology. Today, we have 5,000 different applicants who come present their ideas. We only pick maybe 10, but there are 5,000 people applying, researchers, scientists, people from different places around the US and India to improve societal impact. So part of it is looking at creative ways like an entrepreneur and asking the question is, how do you change the game? And I learned about the US India Endowment Board by looking at the Bird Foundation, which was created in 1960s, which was a collaboration between the US and Israel. And the question I was asking is, why is so much of diplomacy around nuclear pact and agriculture thing and this and that? Why not about entrepreneurship? And every time Obama would go to India, that's $60 million price tag. That's that's what it takes for them to go to New Delhi and the cost of a visit, a state visit. So what if they took $20 million of that and applied that to create a fund which promotes entrepreneurship for commercialization of science and technology? So I think I urge you all to think about not just the impact, but how do you go about bootstrapping your way in a way that works?
Chirag, could you also just add an example? I know you talked about
I think
the size of the community that you want to address.
Yeah, so I think if you think about a couple of the companies that I'm involved with, Brightside and Branch. Branch basically is doing micro loans. Actually, they're more like nano loans, and that micro loans are like $500 and above. These guys are doing like $2 to $20. Now, what's interesting is like, what does that do? Like $2 to $20 doesn't do anything here. But in Nigeria, where they actually do this, it actually enables a vendor that is basically buying fish in the morning, selling it in the afternoon, to basically just be able to buy 3x more fish on that trip. And so they actually are generating 3x more revenue. So funnily enough, they actually repay most of that loan at the end of the day. They really only needed the money for the day, so they can actually just buy a little bit more fish at the beginning of the day and sell it by the end of the day and actually make a little bit more money, and they're happy to pay it back. And so that has actually impacted the number of people that are actually able to kind of grow their businesses. So when we survey the user base that we serve, the vast majority of them are using for business purposes, and the growth rates that they have done have actually doubled, so to speak, because of the capital infusion.
Okay.
That's a real impact on people's lives. And by the way, the company is making money doing this. They're not trying to do this as a nonprofit. They're actually making money. And today, Nigeria is self-sufficient, meaning that I'm on the board of this company. We're actually now going to Mexico and India. The reason now we can go to Mexico and India is because we don't have to pump any more money into Nigeria.
I see.
Nigeria is self-sufficient. It's actually going on. The money that's being generated from the profits that are generated in Nigeria are driving growth in Nigeria. So we're growing 15% month on month, and all of it is financed and funded out of the business that's running in Nigeria.
So one of the interesting things, again, and many of them are talking about delivering outcomes and making that happen and creating leverage. But what kind of struck me listening to them is the lever points that they're using in the social impact comes from their expertise in the for-profit world. So I'm hearing Chirag talk a lot about fintech stuff, and I guess that's what you've been used to. I'm hearing Gunjan talk a lot about business and business connections and leveraging governments and some of that he's, and I'm hearing Abhay talk about communities and his ability to understand it at that community level. And I think that's another very interesting insight. You need to get leverage, and you're bringing your lever points from your for-profit experience. It's applicable in the not-for-profit world, right? Mm-hmm. And that's quite fascinating. So if I look at some of that definition, so we've talked about entrepreneurship, we talked about impact, and you're bringing these kind of interesting capabilities to bear. What would you pick as one of the let's say you're learning, what would you leverage? Abhay, let's start with you. If there's a learning of something that you can truly lever in social impact to make that difference, what would you suggest to the audience?
I'll just say two brief things. One, continuing on the previous one about success.
Yeah.
One thing I learned is that you need to measure everything.
Okay.
So before we went to the Integrated Village Development Project, we did a survey of measuring all the key levels of education, housing, healthcare, and then we did a survey after 1 year to see.
So you
how
understand
things
what
have changed.
impact you're actually
So I think paying attention to metrics and measuring things, because if you don't measure, you're not really tracking, you're just going amorphously. So that's important. But the other thing I learned is when I went to the Village Development Project in '78, there was not a single social worker we had. My wife comes and says, why is there no woman here? And she's an American woman. And I said, nobody wants to join. She said, I'll find one. Here you can see an American woman who doesn't really quite speak as much Hindi. She finds a person who's coming and say, tell her if she will work over there. She said, I'll gladly work, okay? So we were not even looking. So once we employed the women, we find that the women were key to success of the community in making an impact. So like there's an old saying that if you teach a man to fish,
right,
you will feed him for a lifetime. But we just modified it. If you teach a woman to fish, her whole family will eat for a lifetime. The women are the glue of society. So if you educate the girls, educate the women, the future generation, I learned my best thing from my mother.
That's an interesting.
All the great lessons.
Sure.
And so what I say is that this is very key involve them in like microfinance, like Seva, an organization like I also fund, self-employment.
Yeah, even
employee
the self-help groups,
association,
right?
Seva.
Very women-driven in India.
Yeah,
right?
and you know, they just do microfinance. They're essentially running a lot of things. So I'm not saying men are not important, but we have ignored in India especially, and also here, women very largely. And I think it needs to be the yin-yang method, and we need to start paying attention to that for the whole society to come up. And they also care about community, much more so than personal.
One of our programs that we are helping to scale nationally is run by Ashok Alexander, and one of the insights he shared in his presentation builds on that, where he said, if in a village I am able to get 12 women engaged,
Yeah.
I'm confident that we're not going to slip back again, you know? So I think you're kind of talking about that, how important they are in a social context to kind of hold things together. Gunjan, what is your, I'm sure it's going to be different from Abhay's, given your background and what you've been doing, but what's your most interesting insight? What is the hidden gem?
Yeah, no, so firstly, the thing which I'll say is that, you know, you got to think big, you know. So that's one thing I would say. And the other thing I would say is you've got to take your time. So I'm a big believer in serendipity, you know, accidental discovery of good things. So you have to curate serendipity around it and take your time to land the model or the impact that you're seeking. But a lot of entrepreneurs, my advice would be, if I were to do something, I'll take my time to do it right and not be in a rush. But your intentions are clear that you want to do it, but take your time to get it right.
Okay. And wasn't there something about government? And I remember.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, building on that, I mean, I would also say that don't ignore the institutions of government as well as universities. They can be an amazing alliance and a partner for you.
Like this US-India thing, I think
Exactly.
is fully around.
So we leverage the government, so you have to make sure that you're not just working in isolation, you're actually partnering up with the government, and they have amazing resources that you can draw upon.
And what about the academia? Have you worked with them too? Have they
Yes.
been valuable?
So for example, at CFHI, we have partnered with over 70 plus universities around the world to become a partner institutions who send students through us to these countries. So again, universities, you know, academia, government, they are amazingly powerful resources to draw upon. So you've got to engage them, not run in, you know, in a silo.
Great. Shwak, what about you? What's that one insight?
So my insight, I think, is probably apparent from everything I've said so far, but I think I think sustainability is going to be key to create something that's large. So ideally, you want something that is self-powered, and that basically, in my mind, is a for-profit organization.
All right.
A for-profit organization.
Did we see that coming? We did see that coming. All right, that's good.
So I do think that, you know, when you have a for-profit infrastructure that is actually generating capital, so to speak, on an ongoing basis, you can scale the impact without actually having to rely on outside funding sources, which are always going to be a challenge to try to always kind of find, you know, you cannot scale something that is nonprofit infinitely, whereas something that's a little bit more on a for-profit basis can be scaled somewhat infinitely. And so I do think that that's a key element. Like one of the things that, you know, with Brightside, that one of the other companies I'm on the board of, they figured out that to help the people that need financial help the most in America today, most people can't have, you know, everybody knows there's this saying of the $400. Most of the country doesn't have $400 in their bank account to deal with an emergency. But how do you help all of these people? It turns out that actually it's not profitable to help them directly, right? So because to really help them to make money, you have to effectively screw them. So you have to take money from people that don't have it.
Right.
So that's not a scalable model. So you think the solution there is nonprofit. And so most people have been trying to find nonprofit ways of helping these people, but those don't scale. So what Brightside said is, hey, why don't we get actually somebody else to pay for it, where there is a profit motive? And they actually said the employers of these people that are financially stressed are the ones that are paying the price for them not showing to work because they're stressed. We're going to get them to pay for this.
Very nice.
Right? And now we're going to create a for-profit initiative where somebody else that actually does get some return from this is going to pay for it. And they have actually made an impact on 10,000 people's lives. They're actually adding $1,000 a month on their cash flows.
And a model that can scale.
In a model that can scale profitably.
Okay, so again, I think just to summarize again, you're finding your entrepreneurs who brought their own DNA to the social impact world, working with community, leveraging women in a rural context, government and academia, thinking big, and then the self-sustaining for-profit motive. And I think the key takeaway for many of you who raised your hand saying you want to get there is you can do it. You're learning skills already from the work that you're doing, the businesses you're in. Think big, think sustainable. There are a number of levers to pull, measure your impact, and then work with, whether it's the women communities, the government, with other partners like employers, figure out the right way to kind of get that leverage and deliver results. Do we have time for Q&A at all? We do or no? One question? Yeah. All right. Okay, one question.
This question may be more directed towards Mr. Satyavolu. You've been talking mostly about this for-profit model in a small-scale situations. Have you any thoughts on how to expand these businesses to a more medium-scale organizations? Instead of an individual being empowered, can you think of a industry-wide or a larger organization that can help?
Okay, so you had employers. Can you think of other broader communities kind of getting involved in some of your ideas?
Yeah, I think, again, in terms of the scale of these institutions, you can scale them as far as that particular kind of, like, for example, you could have universities that are basically paying to create remote education programs, for example, right? So those are pretty large things, and there are actually companies that are for-profit companies that are actually trying to create that kind of a model. That are expanding access to education in ways that have never been done before.
Right.
So I think each of these kinds of things, depending on the area, the kind of scale and the kind of partners you work with would be slightly
And the business you're in.
That's
so
the
I think
business
the
you're in.
answer is yes.
Yeah.
You can do that. And universities, what Gunjan's talked about, is one of the levers. Communities is another lever. They exist. How do you leverage them in a for-profit way is something you can do. Okay, folks, we will wrap up now. Thank you for your time. And hopefully, how many of you feel a little bit more inclined now towards taking some of these learnings? Can we have a show of hands? Wow. I think we've done our job. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.